Would Brittany finally find the stardom she craved?
Can do anything, oh anything.
I want to act and direct. It's fun and I like the attention.
I want to go in the game, coach. Just give me a chance. And I got one more.
Okay, yeah,
I look at things from an artistic point of view now, because, you know, art and acting and, you know, is a way to escape. And if you have no way to escape, you have to escape in other people's ways.
Why are child stars an endless source of fascination for people? I think because when fame enters your life as a person, the world is actually the same, but your subjective reality is forever altered because everyone treats you differently. And when you're a child, it's hard to make sense of that. So your subjective reality becomes the only reality, and then you start to act crazy, which is what we love to watch. But what I'm actually going to be focusing on is how child stars, specifically those 4 that we just saw, are driven to success and fame because of their parents, because of how blind their parents are to their needs. And my idea is that the more blind the parents are to you and your needs and what you want, the more intense your need for approval. In the case of the 3 girls, like Amanda, Brittany, and Lindsay, their parents literally drove them to that. And in the case of Brad, he wasn't actually raised by his parents, but it's more to prove the point that the parents of those 3 girls were blind to the needs of the girls, even though they were around them, but they couldn't see them. And in Brad's case, the parents were literally not there, so obviously they couldn't see him. So in whatever form that blindness to your needs as a child are, if no one is seeing you, you're going to be longing and yearning for a big public to see you. As a child, you arrive into the world just pure and unconditioned and just ready to be molded into any shape. And then sometimes parents use the child to fulfill their own unmet needs and desires. And for example, we're going to get into it in much detail later, but I'm going to give you a little snapshot from one of the cases that we have, which is Amanda Bynes, and how her father, because of his own unrealized dreams of becoming a stand-up comedian, pushed Amanda into entertainment.
Yeah, you started out the same way I did. I understand that you started out at the Laugh Factory.
Yeah.
Are you a stand-up comedian?
Yeah, well, my dad saw like an article that, you know, kids could do a comedy camp at the Laugh Factory.
Right.
So
Your dad in show business? You say he knows that?
No, well, he likes to do comedy, and so, you know, I've always liked doing comedy, so, you know, he would...
What does he do for a living?
He's a dentist.
Oh,
so he
and
makes
who doesn't
people
love
laugh.
a funny dentist?
Yeah!
And this right there is the core of this 2-part series. Basically how these child stars are being used almost like sacrificial lambs. They are just being used to fulfill not only the needs and unmet needs of their parents, but also for us as a society to project our stuff onto them. And throughout this series, Britney Spears, my Britney Spears, is going to be making special appearances.
When I was younger, and I was always busy, and I was always singing and always dancing all the time, and my mom would just be like, she thought that was normal because I was just like really kind of like just really creative and just really just, you know, like that.
Yep, that was Baby One More Time, Brittany. But also Brittany, the current Brittany from Instagram, is going to be making special appearances. That one is more unhinged, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And as far as the therapy is concerned, Dr. Shafali Tsabari, who I lip-synced to a couple of weeks ago, is going to be making special appearances throughout the show. Basically, she's dedicated her whole career to talking about conscious parenting and awakened families. And her idea is basically that the child is not there for you to control and mold and fulfill your own unmet needs, but actually rather the child is there to mirror you back to you and show you what you need to work on in yourself. But of course, we live in a world where hardly any parent does that. And instead, we're just so afraid of our own ordinariness, our own unmet fantasies and desires. And we just kind of, okay, we didn't get it right the first time. Maybe now the child can fix that for us.
So they live their lives, our children, believing that it's this unattainable fantasy that needs to be their life. And anything other than that is simply too excruciating to bear.
And why do children find it difficult to bear is because we modeled that behavior for them. We find it difficult to bear, so they learn it from us. Hey guys, it's me in denial, your favorite drag therapist. I'm in denial, so you can wake up. Before we get into the series, I want to quickly mention my motivation, the reason why I'm making this series. Well, the reason I make anything is because it touches me personally, and it's actually a point, a trigger point that I need to heal and work on. And the idea of parenting and children is a really big one for me. Even though I don't have children, but this kind of like need to nurture for me is like fulfilled by animals. And I can become a bit like obsessive about that. We need to work on this. So this is where I'm coming from. So I love children, but I'm terrified as hell to have children because of all this stuff. But hopefully one day I'll get over it. And this series is one way I'm gonna do that. So yeah, the way this series is gonna work is in almost like 4 chapters. It's in 2 parts, like one part is this week and next week another part, but thematically it's gonna be broken down into 4 parts. Basically the rise of the child star, Brittany, Amanda, Lindsay, and Brad. And then the first signs of trouble showing up, basically when all those repressed authentic needs of the child can no longer be repressed and they start coming out. And the third part, which is really the core of this whole series, is basically what are the parents' own unresolved needs that they projected onto the children. And the fourth part is what can be done, not just for them, but for us, for anyone who has children in their life or wants to have children in their life, and also our role as spectators and how we observe these child stars. It is well established that the personality and the brain keep developing till the age of 25. Actually, the brain is still undergoing rewiring that isn't complete until you're 25 years old. And that's why stars like Brittany, Amanda, Brad, and Lindsay behave in this kind of unhinged train wreck way that we love watching, because they have nothing normal in their life to go back to. Like fame is their salvation, because the childhood home and the upbringing is so fractured and broken that they have no reference for how to behave. If you compare them to stars like Dakota Fanning, she had a stable home and a family to go back to. Like fame wasn't an escape, it was an add-on. It was a luxury, a pleasure, acting and performing and all of that. But it wasn't salvation from a horrible life.
I have always just loved what I do, but I've also loved my private life just as much, and school has always been important to me, and family.
So let's start with Brittany.
You look very pretty.
Well, thank you.
You've got either I'm on acid or you're glittering. Is there a glitter? Can you send it? They can see that at home.
Yeah, it's like fairy dust.
Fairy dust.
Yes.
Cuckoo.
Brittany joined the Mickey Mouse Club at 12 with the help of her mother, who, by the way, still insists that, it wasn't my choice to be a stage mom. Like, girl, of course it was a choice.
I have to laugh when I hear people call me stage mom because I'm a teacher at heart. The stage mom was not my choice.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't your choice from the get-go when Brittany came into the world, but you certainly used this child to pay your bills.
There was a point in our life where we really went through a terrible financial struggle. I was late on things, I'll be the first to admit. I just tried to do the best that I could do.
And this is something that continued well into much later, like almost a year ago, where after the conservatorship was kind of like dissolved, her mom was asking for Brittany to pay her legal fees up to like $1 million, and then they were negotiated down to $600,000. But you had nothing to do with the there were no lawyers. So what? Yeah. And actually, much is said about her dad's control, and we're gonna get into that later because he did control her with those 13 years of conservatorship. But it was actually her mom's idea to start this conservatorship.
The biggest regrets that I have right now, by looking back, I didn't follow my mother's intuition a lot of times.
As for Lindsay Lohan, she started modeling at 5 years old, and no 5-year-old goes out to get an agent on their own. Even if the child is clever and has a lot of ambition and energy, but they are being guided by parents. And actually, Lindsay's mother is a former singer and dancer who didn't accomplish her dreams, so... And Lindsay rose to fame with The Parent Trap in 1998 and really blew up to global superstardom in 2004 as a teenager in Mean Girls.
You know what? It's not my fault you're in love with me or something. What?
Oh, no, she did not.
And that's when she became a tabloid fixture and was just being hounded by the press and being followed everywhere. And of course, because she's a teenager now, her interests are different. She's drinking, she's partying. There was actually an interview on Jay Leno where she's just talking about how casual it is, that she's, she has no right to privacy and they just follow her everywhere.
Now, I was worried about you. A couple weeks ago, I'm watching the news and I see this car accident thing. Well, what happened there? Tell us what happened.
I was worried about me too.
Yeah.
I don't think I realized what happened until the day after when everyone was saying things about it. I was driving, being chased. I was on the phone with the police, and they couldn't do anything, so they hung up about 3 times.
When you say you're being chased, why are they chasing you?
I don't know.
Because for people like Lindsay and Brittany and all the others, this is normal. Especially if you've been exposed to this since you were a child. Like, yeah, this is the only thing you know, so of course this is normal. And Brittany, Instagram Brittany, would like to say a couple of words about that.
I think normal is really different for everybody.
But actually, it's not normal to have this much scrutiny and people watching you as you're growing up.
You started in the business when you were, what, 6, 7 years old?
I was 7.
Yeah, and you grew up, you've been very successful, but I was thinking you grew up on television, and a lot of us have to go through these awkward stages in our life. You had to do that on TV. Was that hard for you?
When you're 13 and 14 and you're like, you know, getting pimples and you're like growing 6 inches and you're awkward, it's not fun at all.
Again, just like here, Amanda, she just downplays it, but you can tell that the pain is somewhere bubbling up. But we still didn't get to it because they can still put up a facade and perform here. So things didn't get really bad just yet. As for Amanda Bynes, she got an agent at 7 years old, and at 12 years old, her dad signed her up for a kids comedy camp, and then she became part of this SNL type show for kids. And from that, she had her own spin-off called The Amanda Show, which became a hit.
Maybe I should have skipped that 13th candy bar.
And then she became part of Hollywood, where she started starring in Hollywood films.
Everybody, I have something to tell you. I'm not Sebastian. I'm Viola.
Wait.
I've been pretending to be my brother while he was in London for the past 2 weeks.
Just because you wear a wig doesn't prove you're a girl.
Okay, then.
Now on to Brad Renfro. Brad actually had a different start in Hollywood than the others because he wasn't really pushed by his parents. He was actually raised without his parents. His parents, I believe, separated when he was a toddler, and then he was raised by his grandmother from the age of 5. But his father was never part of his life, and his mother remarried and moved away. And he actually got his start in Hollywood with the help of a retired policeman called Dennis Bowman, who was looking after these drug prevention programs for troubled youth. And there was a casting call for the movie Client, which Brad ended up starring in.
Sit down, son.
Do I need a lawyer?
What for?
To protect my rights.
Take me to jail!
Sometimes being strong means asking for help. I'm scared.
The casting director was sending out these casting calls to different programs that work with troubled youth around the country. And Dennis, that policeman who knew Brad, saw that maybe that's one way of him getting away from trouble. Because Brad was actually smoking weed at 9. He started drinking at 11. And at 12, he already started injecting heroin. So part of me wishes that retired policeman Dennis Bowman could have actually recommended therapy instead of pushing him into movies as a way to take him away from drugs. But of course, hindsight is 20/20. And with Brad specifically, I really feel this idea of how your subjective reality and how people treat you when you're famous becomes so, it could actually mess with your head. And it was very evident in one of the interviews for the movie Client.
Brad, it's very nice to have this opportunity to talk with you because, of course, I saw you in the Client. And I didn't realize at the time that it was your movie debut. And I must say that it's an absolutely marvelous performance. Congratulations to you.
Well, thanks. It's no big deal. It's, you know, it's just a movie.
This older reporter, like, who was, I don't know, maybe in her 60s, like interviewing this child, and kind of like she's fawning over him and his talent, and it was kind of sweet and endearing, but it just already, it like flips this power dynamic. And something else that comes up in this interview that's kind of like almost foreshadowing of what's to come, the way he speaks about addiction, like, oh, it's just something that he's seen the bad effects of on his loved ones, but it's something that he doesn't plan on doing. And he does this smile in the end, and you can feel like,
You can have a bad addiction and not even know. And I'm close to a lot of people like that. And, you know, they're still, my loved ones, but, they're stupid.
that is a smile full of sadness. And all of them, whether it's Brad, who is just, playing these kind of like troubled characters where he can almost like play out his own pain, or whether it's people like Brittany and Lindsay and Amanda who started off, you know, the Mickey Mouse Club, you know, all of them were actually hiding something underneath a shiny facade. Because that's the power of Hollywood. It just tells you a fantasy, and nobody says it better than Dr. Shefali.
Disney does a great job. You know, the original fairy tales were nothing like the Disney stories we read now.
And now on to the second chapter of our story, the first signs of trouble in paradise.
Do you need to talk to someone, Brittany? Please go away.
Think it'll take to get the paparazzi to leave you alone?
I don't know. I don't know.
Is that one of your biggest wishes?
With Brittany specifically, unlike most famous people, you can feel at one point in the height of her fame, before that kind of high-profile meltdown in 2008, the way she was chased by the paparazzi, you can tell she did not want it. Like most celebrities are kind of like staging these paparazzi shots and kind of like they're, you know, in contact with them behind the scenes. But in the case of Brittany, I have to say, the way she was being hounded by the press before her meltdown in 2008, where literally like magazines would dedicate teams of photographers just to run after Brittany, you can tell she did not want it.
So I can take a picture. I'm just like you.
Just in front of the street, dog.
Fuck you. You fucking are outside my goddamn home. You stupid fuck. Move. You fucking.
And before her meltdown, the anger started to show. And one of my favorite clips is when she's being asked about which kind of Pepsi she prefers.
I really do like Pepsi.
Really? What's your favorite kind?
My favorite kind of Pepsi's Pepsi.
I have really good days where I deal really well, and then there's some days where it's in my face where you're like, oh, she's feeling it.
But that's typical of us human beings. We don't see the early signs. We only see when like shit hits the fan. Because Brittany throughout the years has always been saying,
I'm angry. I am very angry.
You don't seem angry.
I'm horribly angry. As she smiles.
As you have a huge grin on your face.
No, I'm smiling right now because I think it's funny that y'all are laughing.
but we just continue to ignore these signs and we just consume because, yeah, these celebrities are for our entertainment. The reason we find it easy to turn a blind eye to their troubles is because we find it easy to turn a blind eye to our own troubles. And this is something we all learn in childhood. Not just from our parents, but also from Disney movies, from everywhere.
Sleeping Beauty, you think she was awoken by this handsome, dashing prince? No, he raped her. And she wakes up not with a gentle kiss from the dashing prince, but from the birth of her children, one of whom sucks on her finger and takes out the poison, mistaking it for the bosom. But what a story, I know, dark and very dire to tell our children, but it teaches them subconsciously that do not lie passively waiting, dependent on some prince, because you will be screwed. In this case, literally.
And as far as Brittany's concerned, things started to go really south when she married that backup dancer, Kevin Federline, with whom she had her 2 sons. And I'll never forget that show they did called Chaotic about their life and how hypersexual it was.
Truth is, I want what everyone wants. Love. My ideal guy would be somebody that hasn't really seen that much, because I have. Just didn't believe in the fairy tale.
I care about you.
You can tell like Brittany just, her need for love and closeness and intimacy has always been kind of like played out with men who are troubled, just like her alcoholic father, because there's no room for like tenderness. She's just performing like a machine, and then when that's off, she just needs kind of love. And the way she always expressed it is through like sex.
It was just the sex.
The kisses are really good. The sex is really good. My love doesn't scare me. Other people's love scares me.
And there are all these theories about like how the guys she dated were always handpicked by her team, including her father. And I believe that because I find it very hard to believe that Brittany wasn't allowed even like her own credit card. She wasn't allowed the most basic things or to talk to anyone. Yet she was allowed to pick her boyfriends. Yeah, that's a little bit suspicious. And one of the saddest moments captured of Brittany, in my opinion, is in that documentary, Brittany for the Record, which actually came out after her meltdown in 2008. And I have to say, very pleasantly surprised by how that documentary was not like a fluff piece, even though it was made during the time where everyone was trying to protect Brittany, the brand, because there was so much money at stake. So everyone wanted her to, you know, get back in shape and perform and do all those things. Yet that documentary was surprisingly touching. And I've actually, a lot of the times I've lip synced to Brittany in my shows and previous videos, I've taken clips from that documentary. And one of the saddest moments is when she's on tour, and while she's in New York, she goes to this Broadway show, and then she gets invited for drinks with the actors and the people from that play. And she has like this kind of flirtatious moment with one of the lead actors. And she's sitting on the table with all of them, and she has nothing to say. Like, she doesn't know how to jump into the conversation. It's like her head is like, it's like normal people are talking and she doesn't know what to add to that conversation.
So you've just been like going to do shows to like get prepared for like ideas of what you want?
Just to be inspired, because right now there's just like nothing out there that, at least in LA.
And there was one point where one of the guys, not the guy she's flirting with, but another one mentions some name from the industry, and that's the only thing she can latch on to. She's like, oh yeah, Mark.
Mark Lynch was my understudy.
Oh my god.
It's so sad. Like, Brittany, I'm not making fun of her because I really do love Brittany and I like feel for her so much. Like, and that point, not that I have a similar life to hers, but this inability to connect is something sometimes I identify with, because I feel very confident when I'm performing, whether it's on a stage or in a video or doing one of these things. I feel like I'm really in my element, but when I have to talk to people, I always feel like, is what I have to say, is it interesting? Because I always want to talk about these deep, intense things, and I think that, I don't know, maybe people don't like it. I just really connected to her inability to enter into the conversation. I was like, oh.
With what I do, there's a lot of energy and a lot of people around. I feel in order to protect myself, I have to build up walls and gates. But you have to be careful, because if you do that too much, you end up becoming a prisoner.
But the shit really hit the fan for Brittany when she shaved her head. Isn't it interesting how with all these stars, you know, things are going pretty bad when they start to change their hair color? Because it's actually a sign of freedom. Like, all these kind of like Barbie girls that have to present in a certain way, suddenly they just want to kind of... As for Lindsay, the first signs of trouble started to happen when she started to attack her parents publicly. There was this one story that she posted on Instagram in 2016, and she says something like, sometimes it sucks when your mom isn't there for you, and then she later deleted it. And in 2010, she told the Daily Mail, my father is known for talking to the press and selling stories. He loves the attention. In the past, he said I've done drugs. He put my number on the internet. Who does that? Some of the stuff he's done proves to me he doesn't care about me. And yeah, Lindsay's mother actually became her manager, which is already, I'm always like, also Brittany's father was her manager. And I always think there must be some conflict of interest there. Like, if you're a manager, your main interest is to make as much money as possible. But doesn't that conflict with your responsibilities as a parent? I don't know. And not only did Lindsay's mother become her manager, she was also partying with her later. And we'll get to why parents behave in this irresponsible way in a couple of minutes. But first, let's do Amanda and the first signs of her trouble. Yeah, Amanda Bynes retired at 24 from acting. Imagine, like, that tells you everything you need to know. That at 24, you're done. You know what I mean? Makes you think, like, did you even want this in the first place? Or maybe you could have wanted it, but you were pushed so hard that you'll have a burnout at 24. But not only did she retire from acting at 24, she started using a lot of weed, which, by the way, weed can be good maybe for some people, but Amanda was having psychotic breaks on weed and just going on Twitter and having these rants accusing her father of abusing her in all sorts of ways. And also doing these things that look funny but are actually quite tragic, like asking Drake to murder her. It's like, girl, what are you doing? And then getting arrested and driving under the influence. Yeah, that girl that was happy and just with it and really alert and kind of like could read a room was suddenly...
The way I used to live, I was a pretty cool chick, you know? And I'm not really that way anymore.
And that's what happens when you repress who you are for so long. When your authentic self is repressed and pushed down, of course you're gonna explode. That's why, for example, someone like Brittany is actually acting like a teenager right now because she was frozen at that age. And now she's like this petulant, adolescent, just like, me, I'm angry at this and that. Because, yeah, normal development would have required that you have gone through that at the age where it was appropriate. But because it was repressed, now it's gonna explode. But back to Amanda, she started having, court appearances became her thing. Like, instead of the movie roles, she would just appear in court in a different wig every time. And of course, everyone's watching, being very amused. And she did want to go back to what she initially wanted, which is to go to fashion school. But she got kicked out of fashion school for misbehaving and then rejoined and then quit again to go to rehab. But the true signs, as per usual, happened much earlier, but of course nobody could see them because Amanda sought legal emancipation from her parents as a young teenager. She actually started leaning on the Nickelodeon producers that she was working with, this man and his wife. Again, another example of conflict of interest. Like, okay, I'm sure those two people wanted to help her, but their main interest is in the show to continue. So it's like, if you really take a bird's eye view, you look at these children are being actually raised and helped by grown-up children, people who are just blind adults who are blind to the needs of these children. So of course this whole thing's a mess. Which brings us to Brad Renfro, because the very obvious signs of trouble is when he started getting arrested for drug possession and for actually buying heroin from Skid Row. But again, the signs were much earlier because after he shot to fame with the movie Client in 1992, he was the toast of Hollywood. Specifically, there's this one movie called The Apt Pupil when he was 14 years old.
The things I'm gonna say, they'll never go away. Not for you.
I won't just do nothing.
We're gonna fucking have to!
It was directed by Bryan Singer, who, how do I say this without risking getting my video demonetized? Bryan Singer liked the same things that Michael Jackson liked. You know what I mean? So he would surround himself by vulnerable teenage boys, and he was later accused by many who came forward. And many of those guys said that at the time, Bryan Singer was telling everyone that Brad was his boyfriend, the 14-year-old. And they would all, in the same breath, they would all say that Brad was clearly straight, but he was so out of it that he would just go along with whatever. And the reason why I think Brad was going along with this is you're so desperate for love and affection. So if it comes from an adult in whatever form that it comes, you're going to be like, okay, let's go. And that kind of history that Brad has is something I personally relate to, but we're going to be talking about this at a later time. Maybe in another video or a book. I don't know. But yeah. Yes, Carl. But the real question is, why do we do this as a society to children? Why do we teach them to hide their pain? No one says it better than Shafali.
So we teach our children to sanitize their emotions, to sanitize pain, to pretend that it doesn't exist. Because our deepest fear is that our children will feel pain. But guess what? Nothing hurts our children more than to have a parent who is unable to witness their pain. A parent who is unable to witness the child's pain because of the parent's own unresolved issues around pain, failure, disappointment.
Which brings us to the heart of this series, which is basically the unmet needs of the parents and how those are projected onto the child. Because until you raise yourself as a parent, until you know yourself, you're just basically projecting things onto the child. And because you're so blind to what it is that you actually need, when the child has needs that are different than yours, you're going to be like, how dare this baby come into this world with its own agenda and its own needs? You're going to try to mold it into what you want. It's basically a cycle of disappointment, anxiety, and control. You're disappointed at how your life turns out, so you become very anxious, and then you try to control your child and mold them. And I think the greater the disappointment and emptiness and the void that you feel, the greater the manipulation of the child. And there's no better example than this than Brittany's father, who had her under lock and key for 13 years in that conservatorship.
I couldn't even have a conversation with my mom or dad really about anything. I told them I was scared, and my doctor had me on 6 different nurses with this new medication come to my home, stay with me, to monitor me on this new medication, which I never wanted to be on to begin with. There were 6 different nurses in my homes, and they wouldn't let me get in my car to go anywhere for a month. Not only did my family not do a goddamn thing, my dad was all for it.
And the biggest joke in all this is that the man who was put in charge of Brittany was an alcoholic. During the rise of Brittany, when her first 2 albums were taking off, he was going into a period of severe alcoholism, and she requested and demanded several times that he go into rehab. And in that book that her mother later wrote about the family, she spoke so openly about, you know, how difficult it was to live with an alcoholic and that she feared for her life, and it's insane. But let's go to why Brittany's father actually behaved this way. At 13 years old, Brittany's father, his mom, committed suicide herself on the grave of the infant son that she miscarried. And his own father had his mother institutionalized against her own will, and then later, after she killed herself and remarried another woman who became Brittany's dad's stepmom, he had that woman institutionalized against her own will. So this game of controlling others and, you know, putting them in a psychiatric institution against their own will is something that he learned from his own father.
I cried on the phone for an hour, and he loved every minute of it. The control he had over someone as powerful as me, as he loved the control to hurt his own daughter 100,000%. He loved it.
And a little tragic sidebar of how Brittany came into this world. Before Brittany was born, her mom filed for divorce from her father and actually requested a restraining order because she feared for her life, saying that basically if he's drunk, she's afraid he was going to harm her. And then magically they just reconciled, and a year later, Brittany was born. Bloop. And that book her mom wrote later, she writes in the book in full detail how her husband's alcoholism was on full display for the family. Yet she stayed with him. Like, what kind of example are you setting for these children? Girl. And there was this one scene from that documentary, Brittany for the Record, where it really shows what kind of man her father is. And there was almost something tragic and naive and sweet and depressing about this whole thing. Like she was getting ready for hair and makeup for a show, and he was cooking her this cheese grits. Apparently it's her favorite thing, which looks so unhealthy. And like, anyway, but he was in the kitchen like cooking her. It's like breakfast of champions. Like he was just saying things. Like it's like that's the only way he can show her love, and you can tell that kind of there's a tenderness in it. And he goes and he gives it to her while she's getting ready for the show.
Oh yeah, got my hair cut. I'm ready to go. I'm making my baby some cheese grits. She's been eating them since she was born. She loves them. Everybody else has Wheaties, but Southern girls, breakfast with the champions is cheese grits. Hi, buddy.
But at the same time, you're managing the career of your child who has to be heavily medicated to perform. You're basically selling her for the public so you can make money. Because by the way, he was making $130,000 a year as a salary after the meltdown and when he was managing her career, when she was under his conservatorship, and 1.5% from performances and merchandise sold through the tours. So yeah, you're making her cheese grits, but girl, your daughter is mentally falling apart. So I don't know how helpful the cheese grits are.
I must confess that my loneliness is killing me now.
But yeah, this goes to show you that parents behave in this way because they're so blind. Not only are they blind to what the child needs, because they don't even know what they need themselves. So how can they even give it? Because they lack it themselves. But anyway, this brings us to the end of part 1. So stay tuned next week because we're going to get into the same patterns in how parents project onto their children in the lives of Lindsay, Amanda, and Brad. And we're going to wrap it up with a very nice conclusion. So please make sure to comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you next week.
Your life. Do you know it's weird?
Do I know my life is weird? It's all I've ever known. I don't see it as being weird.